Varmt välkomna hit till Arena-gruppen och den här lanseringen av World Nuclear Industry Status Report för 2025. Eftersom att vi har Mycle Schneider med oss här ikväll så kommer vi att köra det här på engelska. Så jag hoppas att det är okej med alla och vi kommer ha lite Q&A i slutet. Så det är okej att ställa frågor på svenska också, så kan vi översätta det. Men också med det sagt, skriv gärna upp frågor som kommer under kvällens gång, så kommer ni ges tillfälle att få svar på det. So with that said, I'm going to switch to English. And again, a warm welcome to this Swedish report launch of the World Nuclear Industry Status Report of 2025 edition. And my name is Rosanna Endre, and I'm the program manager of Arena's newly launched energy initiative. And we are super happy to have this conversation in collaboration with FES Nordic countries. And yeah, you all know this, nuclear power, it's probably the most politically charged debate in Swedish energy politics right now. And it's too often about whether or not we should have nuclear wind power or not. But as you all know, the energy system is way more complicated than just an isolated technology. And it's all about grid capacity, transmission. It's about investments, prices, etc., but also industrial competitiveness and so much more. And that is why we're so happy about this report. It's so important because what it does is that it gives us this global overview of the industry on a global level. And it doesn't give us a straight yes or no whether nuclear is good or not, but what it does is that it gives us data. It gives us proof and what is actually happening around the world, which we can infuse into the debate that is too often just about fears, hopes, or political stances. So before we get into the program, I will just briefly go through the program for tonight, and I will quickly give the word to our collaboration partner, FES Nordic countries, and then Mycle, our main presentation tonight, will give you the outlines of the report for 2025. And after that, we will have a couple of comments on the report. First, we will welcome up Tomas Kåberger, Professor in Industrial Energy Policy at Chalmers, as well as Lina Reichenberg, Associate Professor in Energy System Analysis. And after that, we welcome up Matilda Molander, CEO of think tank Fores, as well as Lisa Pelling, who's the director of think tank Arena. And then you are welcome to participate in the discussion and give your comments and questions to Mycle and also the others. So with that said, I want to welcome Mycle Schneider from FES Nordic countries to say a couple of words. I'm just going to make sure that this one is on. Wait. Yes, now it's on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So my name is Mycle Schneider and I work as a policy advisor at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung here in Stockholm in the Nordic office. And there I'm focusing, among others, on the socio-ecological transformation and on energy policies. So also warm welcome from my side, and thank you all for being here and joining this evening on the seminar on the latest developments in the global nuclear industry. The findings of the annual report has attracted a lot of attention worldwide and also in Sweden. And we are delighted to have the lead author and the project coordinator Mycle Schneider here with us to present the results. And today we are also pleased to launch the Swedish summary report, a shorter version of the nearly 600-page long Nuclear World Industry Status Report 2025. And this shorter version provides an overview of about the most important trends, figures, and statistics in the Swedish language. And why is this report so important? The reliable data and facts are essential for making well-grounded decisions. And that is why this report and today's presentations and discussions are so important, as they deliver the knowledge and the understanding needed to assess the sector's current state and the future direction of energy policies. And we hope tonight's presentation and the report will deepen your insight into where the nuclear sector stands today, which role it might play in the future or not.
Thank you so much. And with that said, we are going to give the word over to the main presentation for tonight, Mycle Schneider. And we were joking about your bio earlier, and it's so long it's going to take like the full hour of the presentation. So I'm not going to do that, but I will say that you're a independent energy analyst, and also, as Mycle said, the lead author and project coordinator for this report. And the report brings together a contribution of like from a large international team of researchers and analysts, and gives this comprehensive overview of the global developments in nuclear power. So Mycle, we're so happy to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the organizers and co-hosts to invite me to do this presentation. For those who are not so familiar with this project, it's been an annual report for the past 17 years. It's like since 2007 it has been produced annually. And since 2012 I'm also the publisher of the report. The basic idea is to put together truly international team, not North American or European, but truly international team. So we have that year, 2025 edition has seen 18 contributing authors from 9 countries, 4 continents. And the idea is also to have an interdisciplinarity in the approach. So we have a broad range of expertise that is contributing to the analysis, and that it includes academics, like there's several university professors or people from think tanks, or people like, for example, a former vice chair of the Japan Atomic Energy Commission, or a senior writer and journalist who spent 25 years at the Wall Street Journal. So very senior writers. And I think this interaction between natural scientists and writers, journalists is very beneficial to the output, which is hopefully understandable for a large number of people. So this is not only for experts. Like, if you want to read it, you can read it. You need some time to get through the 589 pages, but it's also meant as reference. It's not meant to read as a novel, although some people already said before that it actually reads like a novel. But so that's the kind of basic idea. And what we do is we developed over time a certain range of indicators that we follow over time, because we think that energy policy is a long-term issue. It's not something you can actually understand anything if you just look at the photograph of a year or so. You need to look at the movie in order to understand over longer periods of time what's actually happening. So it's to identify trends or to see what are major changes that are happening, not only in what the nuclear sector concerns, but more broadly. So we frame the nuclear issue in the energy policy context. I think it's crucial. It doesn't make much sense to take nuclear and just talk nuclear. I mean, this is not a bubble. I mean, it's an industry that lives in an energy policy context. So before I get into the data itself, let me say what I'm not talking about. but what is in the report. So you can look at it if you wish. We have a very, like the focus chapter this year was the analysis of system issues for nuclear power within a renewable dominated energy system. Like what are the challenges, the specific challenges? And it's really for people who are interested. I think we made some very interesting pieces of analysis in this chapter. We also have a chapter on Russia interdependencies, like the interdependencies between the industries in the West and Russia, an increasingly obvious issue that people talk about. We have an extensive analysis of potential newcomer countries. We have a Fukushima status report that we put out since the events started in 2011. And we have a decommissioning status report to see what actually has been done with now over 200 reactors that have already been closed. So what the status of decommissioning is. We do not touch the three traditional issues of nuclear power: safety, proliferation, and nuclear waste. And it's for good reasons that we don't cover this. First of all, there's many reports out there. There's lots of analysis existing. But it's also, we think, the industrial analysis that is often lacking and the systemic approach to the issue. So let me get into it. The first indicator is the national programs for nuclear power. We have now 31 active programs. 5 programs were phased out over time. The last one to close its last reactor was Taiwan last year. It didn't make much noise. There's much more noise about projects and hypothetical projects than about often on-the-ground factual developments like the final closure of a national program. And the other point which is interesting is that of those, by the end of the year, we had only 8 countries that have been building new reactors. Since the beginning of the year, there's 2 more countries that started construction. One is Hungary, where, amazingly enough, but the Russian industry builds a new nuclear reactor in the European Union in times of war with Ukraine, which I find pretty stunning in political terms. If you consider, sanction package after sanction package that is being voted on, and at the same time there is business in multi-billion euro size with the Russian nuclear industry. The other construction start in incumbent nuclear countries is in Canada, and we'll talk about that a bit more because it's one of those small SMRs. You might have heard the term SMRs, small modular reactors, and that's the first one. It's actually of the same design that is proposed for Sweden. So we'll come back to that a bit later. In other words, it means we have currently 10 incumbent countries that are building. So that's 1/3. 1/3. The 2/3 are not in the course of building of the incumbent countries. Next indicator is electricity generation. Those are the stacks. And you see that we had this development until 2006, where we had a first sort of peak. That peak was taken over in 2024, just by a little bit, 14 terawatt hours, which is not very much. It's about the output of a very large, like a large nuclear power plant annually, if it operates normally. And we see with the red line, that is the share of nuclear power within the mix of commercial electricity generation. So what we have witnessed for some time after this break, post Fukushima, post 3/11, it really looked like a new trend, like an upwards trend. But then it kind of zigzagged. There is no further major trend to be identified. But the key thing here is something else. It's the role that China plays in the picture. And we will see this throughout the presentation. China is dominating nuclear statistics by far as a single country building. If you look outside the country, outside China, we realize that since the last peak in 2006, there's actually a decrease of nuclear power generation by close to 14%, or over 360 terawatt hours. So the total was increased by 14, but the decrease outside China was over 360. So outside China, we're actually witnessing a significant decline over the previous record. The next indicator is the startups and closures. Startups in our statistics means a grid connection of a new reactor, and closure means grid disconnection, so the last day of electricity generation by a nuclear power plant. And we have seen in 2025, so this is updated like from the actual report that was published in September last year. These are updated numbers to the end of the year. Okay, if you're really interested in the year, in the absolute numbers, just be a bit careful of what the reference date is, because we could not. Everything will be updated for the next report, but I'm not going to present you the next report. This is 2025. So we have updated what we could up to the end of the year. So be a little bit careful of what the reference dates are for the indications. So in 2025, we've seen 4 new startups, and we have seen 7 closures in the world. So a net decline. And over the past 20 years, so the period 2006 to 2025, it's quite balanced, like as many startups as closures. But here the China factor plays again. I mean, 53 startups of the total, so more than half, have been in one single country, in China. And they didn't have any closures. So the actual net situation is a balance of -55 outside China. So we always get this kind of same picture. We have, a certain dynamic in China, and a dynamic which is completely different outside China. Another issue which is interesting is we monitor the scheduling of grid connections. So we look, 1st of January, we look at how many reactors are scheduled to be connected to the grid during the year. And then we look at 31st of December, how many were actually connected to the grid. And it's quite remarkable, because like for 2025, there were 13 reactors planned on 1st of January, but only 4 made it to the grid. And it's a pattern which we've seen in previous years, like in 2024, it was 14 reactors planned. In reality, 7 only made it to the grid. This is a really particularly interesting indicator, because what does it show? It shows that even in the last stretch of construction, the building industry is not capable of actually predicting reliably when the machine will actually generate power and income on the side. So many of these in this last stretch are actually pushed into the following year. And we've witnessed this for, some projects year after year. They kind of get delayed from one year to the next, to the next, to the next. Because if a construction, for example, one unit that is under construction, of course with interruptions, but however, since 1985, it's still under construction, but we've heard that it would start up in the current year for the past 5 years, right? And it's supposed to start up this year, but we will see at the end of the year. And that is interesting if you're in a situation like in Sweden, where you discuss some project that is way in the future, maybe, a maybe project. How reliable can it be, what is planned today, considering the industry's performance in reality? This is not theory, this is reality, right? So it's quite an interesting indicator. So the next one is the operating nuclear reactors in a cumulated way. So we see this increase until the end of the 1980s. We see a maximum number of 438 units in 2002. And we see this Fukushima effect, an increase and then a new plateau. So, as we've seen before, there's no increase, there was no further increase then, but over the past few years, it has plateaued out. And the number, like end of year, 404 reactors, to be compared, with what we had already in 1989, which was 418, right? So it's even lower than what we already had at the first peak that the industry had at the end of the 1980s. The red line is the operating nuclear capacity, and you see that the shape of the curve is not exactly the same. Like it increases, although the number has not increased, which is kind of strange. But it's due to two factors. One is new reactors have increased in size, not decreased, not small reactors. They became bigger and bigger and bigger, for good reasons, by the way. Economies of scale, for example, is like an experience in industry that works for many. And that was the main reason why reactors got bigger, not smaller. And the other reason is so-called uprating. Uprating means you increase the existing capacity in a built operating power plant by technical means. There's various ways how you can do that. And it can be substantial. Like in Sweden, it's been done like in other countries, and it can be over 20% increase of the nominal capacity of a given reactor. We have seen for the operating capacity a similar situation of a peak, a new peak. But as we've seen, it's very slight, the differences with earlier peaks, and that has no impact on the global situation of developing capacities of electricity generation and the actual output of electricity generating machines. The next indicator is reactors under construction listed. That indicator peaked in 1979, it's also a few years back, at 234. And so we have today, with 66 reactors listed under construction, or at the beginning of the year, about a quarter of those numbers. And if we look outside of the China effect, we see that this number, 30 units under construction outside China, was already achieved historically in the late 1950s, right? So in the meantime was the big boom of the nuclear industry. But over the past 30 years, hardly anything moved outside China. Now, having said this, China is the large building country, but one can look at the issue from another perspective. And that is who is the vendor? Who is the technology vendor for reactors that are built around the planet? And one realizes that the key player is Russia. It's not China. China has only been building in China and in one other country, and that is Pakistan. Otherwise, it's Russia dominating entirely the situation, the global situation. So China is building in 3 what we call newcomer countries, Bangladesh, Egypt, and Turkey. Russia is also building in India and China, some older nuclear countries. And it's finishing a couple of vintage projects, one from the 1970s in Iran, and one in Slovakia. That's the one I mentioned earlier that started building in 1985.
What is a vintage?
Like an old project, like it's a vintage in the sense of archaic, you know, it's like from ancient history. So, I mean, if a reactor has been under construction for 40 years, it's sort of like ancient history, right? I mean, that's in that sense. Or even 50 years, like Iran, right? Started building in 1976. And still not finished. I mean, of course, they have interrupted, you know, for various reasons. It's not been ongoing all that time, but it's the same project. So it is a situation. One can sum up by saying, you know, the nuclear building industry is China builds at home and Russia abroad. That pretty much sums it up. The other aspect which is interesting is that of 66 reactors listed under construction, 63 or over 95% are either in nuclear weapon states or are implemented by nuclear weapon states controlled companies like Rosatom for Russia or EDF for France in other countries.
What was the percentage?
Over 95%. So 63 of 66. And the 3 other remaining reactors are under construction in South Korea. So it's the only case that doesn't obey to this definition, which is interesting. One can wonder why that is the case. Might be a point for discussion. Next indicator is construction starts. The technical definition of a construction start, until recently at least, was the beginning of the concreting of the foundations of the reactor building. So the base slab, when you start concreting the base slab of a reactor building, then the reactor starts officially constructing. So everything else that is done in such a project, from planning to, you know, approval procedures of, you know, the roads that are being built, infrastructure around it, all this work is not included in the construction time when we talk about, you know, duration of construction. So what we've seen is basically that indicator peaked in 1976, 50 years ago, at 44. So we are at about, you know, as in the accumulated numbers, about a quarter of that figure, with 11, which is a little higher than what we've seen over the past few years. It is also noteworthy here that a lot of these reactors that are in the statistics at some point as under construction are actually not finished. Like we have now, I think, 95 or so, almost 100 projects that were officially under construction that have been abandoned in due course for XYZ reasons. For example, Westinghouse, formerly US company, went bankrupt, has then been bought up by Canadian consortia, that abandoned, in the course of that, construction site of 2 reactors in the United States and South Carolina have been abandoned after spending about $10 billion. So in these almost 100 construction sites, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of sunk investment that kind of stands somewhere in the rain these days. So if you see that there is somewhere a nuclear power plant under construction, it does not mean that it's guaranteed that it will produce electricity. You know, nobody knows. 1 in 9 have been abandoned. The other point, of course, is the China factor. So of 9 reactors, of 11 construction starts, 9 were in China. And you see how significantly China has been dominating the numbers over the past 15, 20 years. So outside China, we have hardly anything, right? I mean, we have seen in 2025 2 construction starts, 1 in Russia, so it's again the same countries, 1 in Russia and 1 in South Korea. We have seen in the beginning of 2026, I mentioned that earlier, one construction start in Canada and one which is this miraculous one of these tiny small ones, and one in Hungary that I mentioned done by the Russian industry. So otherwise in the EU, this is what we have seen until the end of the year. There were only 2 construction starts over the past 35 years. That was Olkiluoto and Flamanville, and both have been connected to the grid. So the only one that had been left over is this vintage project from the 1980s that is scheduled to come online this year. So concerning Hungary, I mean, we had a little development that is a new government that, you know, is it's like regime change, one has the feeling, you know, to some extent. I think it's might be a bit overrated, but it's interesting to see that the new prime minister has stated that it's like up for discussion, the project. So because he considers it expensive, and we know that, you know, historically Russian projects have often been connected to corruption, and corruption was one of the accusations of the Orban regime, right? But we don't know. We don't know whether this was the case for this Paksh project. But in any case, it's an uncertain future for the project, according to the statements of the new prime minister. Uncertain projects we also see in the United States, a company called Fermi America that had the plan to build like 4 Westinghouse 1,000 megawatt reactors on state-owned land, which you know was supposed to make it easier. If it's Department of Energy land, you don't even have to purchase land. You can maybe water down licensing procedures. You know, everything was supposed to be made easier. But investors don't seem to be so convinced anymore. Like when you look at this is from yesterday, I think, no, from Friday, last Friday. Since the introduction to the stock market, the value dropped by 80%. And if you have invested money, you know, in a company like that, you're not really happy, right? And so what we're seeing already is that there is, I mean, that's the US system, is class action suits are being prepared. Class action suits, for those who don't know, it's like basically a group of investors would go take a lawyer and go to court because, you know, they have the feeling that they have been fooled, right? Now, if there's no building, it means like those programs are aging, you know, over time. So of the top 5 reactor fleets in the world, only China has a program that is around 10 years. Although we've seen that even in China, you know, there has been an increase over the past few years, which is interesting. So they're not maintaining like a startup level to keep a certain young age on average. The next is South Korea with around 25 years of age. Then we have Russia with around 30 years. France, 40 years. Beautiful. Have you seen this line? The straight line since the middle of the 1980s. It's just perfect. And the United States is almost the same, but it goes back to the middle of the 1970s. So they have been increasing the average age for the past 50 years. So they're basically gaining a year every year, you know. And so the average in the world is around 32 years, which is you know, younger than France, but and the US, but it's still a pretty advanced age, right? So do you know where Sweden is? In here? Pretty close to the US. And it's nice and straight too, isn't it? I mean, they had the only blips was when the last blip in 1985 was the last new reactor that started up. And otherwise, it's kind of nice. The other blips that we had after is because older reactors were closed. So your average drops a little bit. So this is basically, you know, from another technological age. Now back to these small ones. What have we got so far? I mean, what do we know about these things? The public perception is basically that you can order these things at Amazon. That's sort of the kind of perception, right? I mean, they're everywhere. And in reality, they're nowhere. And if you look, what we're seeing is like the only one that had been under construction for 10 years was in Argentina, was a domestic design, and they stopped it in 2024, basically saying they would want to go rather for another design. So it was abandoned. One of those, almost 100, right, that are standing out in the rain.
What was the design?
It was 25, 30 megawatt reactor, light water. I think it was a light water reactor, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was just like 25, yeah, it was Karam 25, so it was a 25 megawatt reactor.
What's the design in Canada?
The BWRX, it's the one you're interested in. We come to that. So the one that had been most advanced in Canada was the so-called micro modular reactor, which was actually expected to be built the first. And in fact, the parent company went bankrupt in the US, and the licensing authority on the website, they say the instruction has been paused. It's been now 2 years that the term paused has been on the website. I don't know why. I mean, the parent company is bankrupt. I mean, there's at this point no perspective for this project, but it has not been like withdrawn officially. It has been paused. Now, in France, the most promising one, so the kind of the French case, was Narea, which was considered as a startup, the most promising of the proposals that were on the table in France, and the company went bankrupt. Not the parent company, the company itself went bankrupt in February. So there's always public money involved, right? Like, I mean, these companies got funding, startup funding, seed money, as we say also, that are changes very much from one case to the other, but the minimum sort of is in the tens of the millions. That's the order of magnitude. So what we have is two modules operating in Russia and 2 modules operating in China. Same countries we've seen before. So the 2 ones in Russia are so-called floating reactors. So they're on barges and the barge can be kind of moved in the sea, and it has been like dragged to the Arctic or so. I mean, way out east. And so the estimated time scale for construction was 3.7 years. Reality was 12.7 years. So it didn't really work out. Once it was completed and pulled into the region where it's operating, the operation didn't really work out as planned, because what is called the load factor, so the electricity generation compared to the theoretical maximum, was only 36% for one module and 28% for the other. So very low. Like the best nuclear power plants, commercial nuclear power plants, are over 90%, have that same factor. You can call it productivity, right? Like, for example, even over the entire US fleet, it's around it's over 90%.
Is that including recharging time?
Yes. And the other, without getting into any speculation on costs or so, the investment that the Nuclear Energy Agency of the OECD has estimated last year was around $15 billion, of which only about 1/3, $5 billion, were private funding. The rest was public money. But the other point in this is this funding, I mean, funding for SMRs is spread out over a very large number of designs that are being designs. I say designs because most of them are PowerPoint designs, right? I mean, they're not detailed engineering designs. They are PowerPoint reactors. And if there's over 100 and you have to spread out $10 billion over 100 reactors, it's nothing. It's peanuts. It's to compare it with the reality of a reactor development, the only one that got certified in the United States is a NuScale, so-called NuScale reactor. It's a module size of 77 megawatts, and the investment is around $2 billion, right? So that gives an idea of how much it actually costs. So to have 10 billion for 100 designs doesn't allow anything much to actually happen. So back to the BWRX, because that's the one of the 2 designs you're interested in Sweden. I'm saying you, that's probably wrong, but I mean, some people in Sweden are interested in. And if you look, this is the construction site in April. And it's interesting because they said this is construction start, because what they do is you can see in the middle, this is the foundation. So, and this is what they call, this is the M in the small modular. It's the module, they prefabricated the entire foundation. And so that foundation is being lowered into a 35-meter deep hole, which will contain the reactor. That's the idea. But if you look around that hole, there's not that much being built yet, right? So there's a lot of work to be done yet. Originally, the time scale was grid connection by 2028. That doesn't work anymore, so they have pushed it back just prior to construction start, to the end of 2030. Which is very interesting because we know by experience that most of the delays in construction come during construction. Not before, there's also cases of delays, But the real challenge is obviously the time when these things are actually under construction. That's where we see the most of the delays. So we'll find out soon enough, you know, what will happen there. Please.
Curious, how do you define the starting time in this case? Before, like, you have like large reactors, you will have like a first like tank of concrete being built. That's the same time. But in this case, it's same time like they start the fabrication on like the reactor core in the company or
No, we define it. It was a challenge because we had to redefine basically construction start, but we define it as the laying of the foundation. So the insertion, the placement of the foundation is the construction start. So what is now, as you see, like in money terms, it's very interesting because the cost estimate for the first reactor is 6.1 billion Canadian. I should have counted what that is. Somebody said it's like around seven kronas to the, is it? Something like that, roughly. So it's, even the estimate prior to construction time is very expensive. It's very high, you know? It's like the orders of magnitude are like, you know, sort of twice as much as what a large reactor estimate was at construction start, you know. So obviously we don't know what, you know, the end cost figures will be, but it's already, even in the original estimate, it's very expensive compared to any other designs.
You've been measuring the time from the foundation being laid, but you also have an average time from when the first official decision was made.
Very true. Very true.
Please write down your questions. You will be able to ask them all afterwards. Thank you.
It's very true. I just answered this one. Otherwise, I mean, I'm happy to take just quick clarification questions, but otherwise, if we get into discussion, I'll never get through. You're perfectly right, but it's very complicated. Like to do timelines, you basically have to do individual project timelines. We have started doing that, but it's a huge amount of work. Because, you know, like even political decisions or like, let's say, you know, a final investment decision, which is sort of an international term, but it's not necessarily defined the same way in each country. So the actual moments are not necessarily comparable. And then you have, you know, countries where you vote to build a nuclear reactor, but you have countries where you don't vote. So you know, what we're trying to do with this is to try to accumulate something that is comparable. So, but we would love to do timelines that include all those milestones, you know. It's just we're sort of limited, and it's already close to 600 pages, you know, so.
Technical question. If you look at this figure there is for 4 reactors.
No, the 6.1 is for the first one.
The 21 is for 4 reactors.
Yes.
And the cost difference between the first reactor and the fourth reactor is not very big.
No.
The cost reduction is very small.
Yes. So it's one of the big discussions in the industry is to say what can you actually gain by
What's the learning experience?
exactly learning experience, especially when you say, I mean, learning experience is still a fraction of or is one part of it. The other part is to say what would cost a program of 4 reactors per reactor compared to the cost of one single reactor. And so there are discussions about sites. What's the site cost? When you have a site with 2 reactors, or you have a site with 4 reactors, or a site with 1 reactor. And there's no conclusive thing. Yeah, and even for existing projects, the differences are so enormous that it's what kind of lessons can you draw at each project, and whether it's a couple or 2 or 4 is different. You know, so that's one of the big problems in this industry, that the numbers are so small that it's very difficult to actually have learning effects, which in the end is one of the key problems of the industry itself.
Yeah.
They're not building enough to actually learn. And the curves are usually negative learning. Prices go up. Costs go up. So those are the two models that some people are looking at in Sweden. The BWRX, this is boiling water reactor X, like the X for, I don't know, actually. I don't know whether Elon Musk is involved, but the new one. That has never been built anywhere, right? So the Canadian example is the first one, where they're in the course of building it. But it's also interesting to see that it has not been certified elsewhere. Like, it has not undergone a complete certification process. It's underway in the UK, but it has not finished. And the other thing is that design is developed by a consortium of General Electric, GE, and Hitachi. And they have never built, this consortium has never built any reactor of any sort anywhere. But they, of course, have built individually. So GE has built reactors and Hitachi has built reactors, but that's a long time ago. It's like over 2 decades ago or so that they have built their last reactors. Rolls-Royce is much worse. Rolls-Royce has never built any nuclear power plant of any sort in anywhere, you know. And in fact, when we look, you know, at all the discussions that are taking place now for several years, that's what we do, right? We look at all these discussions. Rolls-Royce has made it always very clear, you know, either they get at least matching funding from the government or they drop the whole thing, right? I mean, they're very clearly not ready to take the risk of this. It's kind of similar to Vattenfall. They don't seem to be so enthusiastic of taking the you know, investment risk, shoulder it, unless there is you know, the government says, oh, if it's higher, then we'll pay for it. So, but they did select a site which is remarkable because it's like prior to actually completing the design, they're already looking at sites. In fact, we have seen in history over and over again that you know, reactors are the construction starts without the designs being ready, and it's one of the reasons, identified reasons, of cost increases, right? I remember when Olkiluoto 3 was 2 years into construction, the local utility boss of the program said, you know, kind of annoyed, said, we're 2 years into the program, we have about half of the plans. You can't build a nuclear power plant without plans, at least not in Finland, you know. This was an on-the-record statement. This was an on-the-record statement. And that is a pattern, like we've seen this for Flamanville, and you wouldn't believe it, but they talk now about an EPR2, where the design is not completed, but they have started doing, they have 1,000 people preparing the site for building something where the design has not even been completed. I mean, this is pretty amazing, you know, when you have identified this as a problem. Now, just quickly, I mean, construction starts. This term has been used, and it's part of the kind of imagination, collective imagination, you know, that all these things are underway. This is a project which was launched by Bill Gates' company, TerraPower. Also, I mean, it's been 20 years ago that he funded this. For the time being, he has nothing under construction, right? But they announced sort of, you know, he went with a hard hat doing a photo op to the site, and people understood that's a construction start. It's obvious, right? But it wasn't. 2 years after, in April this year, they do this photo op. And I contacted the company and I said, what are you doing now? Is this construction start? I mean, are you concreting? And so she said, no concrete, but I can send you the picture of the photo shoot. And she sent me this picture. I mean, this is 2024 and 2026. I'm not so sure they made so much progress, you know, but it's not construction start. This is what is, it's like, it's misleading, right? I mean, people get the impression that, but it's not the technical term we're talking about. Now, as we've seen for large reactors, so what's the investor confidence? This is like from yesterday, stock market situation. So if you look at NuScale, as I said, it's the only one, the only SMR company that is listed that has a certified design. But investors kind of getting nervous, right? They lost 50% of their stock value over the past 6 months. 50%. You know, there's a few more investors that are not so happy. And, you know, for the other company, Oklo, that have they basically have a PowerPoint design, not much more. And people are not so happy with, you know, losing 43% in 6 months. Now, there's this atmosphere that has been created, you know, around nuclear power in general, but around SMRs in particular. And the president of the European Commission has been quoted as saying, Germany made a big mistake in phasing out nuclear power, and we should, you know, do something. And the SMRs, you know, we are doing now, supporting the SMRs. When this statement came out, I thought, now the Commission, the European Commission, is on the record of having disavowed SMRs. Because the money they are offering is so small, 200 million euros, is just a joke, basically, compared to the challenges in investment terms. And they're not even saying grants or subsidies, they're saying loan guarantees. So that wouldn't change anything. And the Commission, we actually briefed the European Commission about our report in January, and they clearly said they have an industrial alliance where there's 8 companies, 8 designs, and they say our big problem is we have at least another 3 that are at the door that want to come in and profit of some money and subsidies and assistance, but we need to get down to 1 or 2 maybe, right? I mean, that's the only way to actually get a design that would be manufactured in any numbers that could be relevant. So the last part, I'm just quickly going through a chapter that we call nuclear power versus renewable energy deployment. So what we've seen in investment terms is that, you know, like the investment in nuclear power has been basically flat. And comparable to this, it's especially solar, but it's solar, wind, and other non-hydro renewables. This does not include hydro. And this is only 2024, 2025 is skyrocketing concerning solar. Not so much wind, didn't increase as much as solar, but the big winner is clearly solar. And I just got this off the web. This is the projections of the US Energy Information Administration, which is like the government branch of energy statistics. And that's what is in the pipeline for 2026. And it's staggering. I mean, over half, 51% is solar in terms of gigawatts, right? In terms of capacity to come online. This is not like to be built or something. This is to come online. And over a quarter is batteries. Over a quarter is batteries. And this is basically the big change that happened over the past 2 years since I've been here the last time, is the battery revolution. One other point in the middle is China, of course, is the key player, not only in nuclear, but especially in everything else. And they brought down over the past 15 years the coal share from over 80% to less than 60%, which is a dramatic change, you know, and relatively quickly. And you see the role that is played by solar and wind. Nuclear, the share is actually shrinking. And if you see the orders of magnitude, it's obvious. In 2025, China started up 2 nuclear reactors, that's 2.5 gigawatts, but they started up over 300 gigawatts of solar alone. So even if you have, like, in China, it's about 7 times more electricity generated per gigawatt installed for a nuclear power plant compared to solar, it's still phenomenally more production, real production capacity that was added in solar than in nuclear. And that's what I hinted at, is the battery revolution. What we had was a kind of a 2 years of freak out, where people thought that lithium, there's not enough lithium in the world, you know, we're going to get shortages, we're going to be in trouble, it's going to be horribly expensive, etc. And that faded away after finding more resources, more diverse sources, basically finding as much as you look for, right? If you spend more money looking for, you find more. And so we got back on track. You could just prolong this line straight, right? And the cost dropped for large batteries in this 1 year, 2024, by 40%. 40%. I mean, 40% reduction just changes a lot, you know, in the overall situation. Then came 2025. And that, so just to clarify, this is Goldman Sachs. And the yellow part here is forecasts, like speculation. And you see what they, you know, for 2025, like a significantly, how do you say, less steep decline. The reality was the opposite. This is 2024, and this is 2025. So the decline in cost increased by another 45%. So 40% in 2024, 45% in 2025. And we will see this year what that actually means in the installation of batteries. And look at the US, right? I mean, they go full speed into it. China has started late in this field, but are catching up quickly. Also, this is a side comment, but a lot of this expansion of photovoltaics capacity is now, the growth rates are very large in the in southern countries. There has been kind of a shift and less, especially in the wind sector, like it was actually lower investment levels in 2025 than what we've seen in 2024 for wind. But this was more than made up by countries in the south. There's a shift, you know. So globally, we're still increasing significantly. And the other point is that a lot of it's decentralized, much more than what we think. And meaning decentralized, a lot of it is actually behind the meter. So it's not going through the accounts. And the first time we've seen this was in beginning of 2025 in Pakistan. By all means, Pakistan? What happened was that there was, you know, some analysts saw that there was a decrease in public electricity consumption. Nobody understood this. This didn't match the economic data, right? And then somebody had the idea to look at the import statistics of panels from China, solar panels from China. And it came out that over 20 gigawatts, what the exact numbers are, who knows? But the order, let's just fix the orders of magnitude. 20 gigawatts of panels in 1 year. In 1 year, right? I mean, France has installed in 50 years like a little less than 25 gigawatts or something. Pakistan imports in 1 year 20 gigawatts, and the cumulated now in Pakistan is around 50 gigawatts. So twice as much than France. And they built this up in 5 years instead of 50 years. This is reality. And you can see this from space. This was in 2022. This is in 2025. And the nice, interesting thing is this is not grid connected. People just put them on the roofs. And by the way, some of them are not even bolted to the roofs. They're laid on the roofs. I've seen pictures where people are in the winds. They get a storm and people are sitting on their panels, you know, to make sure they're not blown away, which is a bit strange because you think they're just going to be blown away with the panels, you know, but that's another story. So that's about it. I will not read the entire slide here, but basically what we're seeing, there's a number of trends that we had identified, you know, over the past few years. It's nothing new. It's like nuclear is rather on the decline than on the increase, or at best it's stagnation. And there is the really new thing is the battery factor. That has changed dramatically over the past 2 years. But if that has changed, it means that everything else changes. And this gives like a boost to the potential for variable renewables that has not existed, you know, in the past. So when we thought, you know, in 2024, we said, you know, it might be, it looks like it could be a global change maker, solar plus. Is it church time or? So when in 2024 we thought, well, maybe this is a game changer, you know, the solar plus batteries, and in 2025 it had already happened, right? So now even the Financial Times had last Friday was the title of the Financial Times. So even the Financial Times has caught up now to the hypothesis. Thank you very much for your attention.
So much, Mycle, for this presentation, and I think it clearly shows that the debate about nuclear need to go beyond the political preferences and rather be about actual delivery, right? Like who is building, where, how fast, and not the least at what cost. And with that, we are moving on to some comments. Thank you very much. We will welcome you back up, Mycle.
Thank you.
And as I said before, we will have some comments, and then we will have a Q&A later on. So save your questions. And with that said, I want to introduce Tomas Kåberger, Professor of Industrial Energy Policy at Chalmers, as well as former Director General at the Swedish Energy Agency, Energimyndigheten, as well as former board member of Vattenfall. And Tomas has also written the foreword to the Swedish report, the Swedish version. And Lina Reichenberg, welcome up, Associate Professor in Energy System Analysis, also at Chalmers. And Lina's research focuses on how political decisions and market rules and investment shape the energy system of the future. And not the least, you're also a senior energy expert here at Arena as part of our newly launched energy initiative. So thank you so much for being here. And now we want to hear your thoughts and reflections from a Swedish perspective on the report and Mycle's presentation. Let's make sure they are both, that's on?
Yes.
It's on. Great. Thank you. Let's...
Thank you. Is you on? Yeah.
Let's see.
You had to switch.
Hallå, hallå. Funkar den?
No.
Yes.
I mean, since we didn't rehearse, Thomas, how do you want to do this? Do you want to
You start or I start? What do you prefer?
I start.
You start, Lina.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for your presentation. So, yeah, for me, the question about nuclear or
Closer to the...
sorry, or some other type of electricity production is a techno-economic question. But it turns out that in Sweden, at least the last few years, it became almost identity politics, which I very much oppose. So I really want to talk about two things today, and one is related. Okay.
Much
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. So one is about cost, and the other is about time and market. And I'll just start with the cost. So during your presentation, I did a small calculation. And if the government gets what they want, they said they wanted 5 gigawatt of nuclear in Sweden. And now we have about 7, so it's a little less than doubling the capacity. And if I'm being very optimistic, what we have to pay for that nuclear is about 1.50, so 1 crown 50 öre per kilowatt hour. And that means a premium of roughly 80 öre compared to producing that electricity in some other way. That's also CO2 neutral. And since we are about 5 million households in Sweden, that means 6,400 crowns per year per household. That's a lot of money. I mean, it's one way of looking at how costly this is. And then, again, I'm being optimistic about the cost for nuclear then. I think that number kind of speaks for itself, so yeah, I'll pass over to you.
We didn't rehearse. That was about the point I was going to make. As you said, I think you're a bit optimistic, but Mycle said he was not dealing with some issues on risks and accidents and waste and so on, but you didn't deal very much with economics either, and I can understand that because you're trying to be very fact and number based, and the sources of numbers on cost are not so reliable. But now there are 2 good sources. In France, the Cour des Comptes, the sort of national revision equivalent, have made 2 reports, one in 2020 and one in 2025. And they contain detailed numbers on the European pressurized reactor projects that EDF is doing. And the conclusion is that the cost of electricity from Flamanville 3, for example, would be in the order of 1.50 to 2 crowns per kilowatt hour, transformed into Swedish crowns then. And that's a lot. The other source that is relevant is the cost of continued operation of Swedish reactors. The original investments are now paid off. There have been reinvestments and there are operating costs. And these are now shared between the owners of the nuclear power plants that are all individual limited liability companies who hand in their annual accounts to the Swedish authorities. And therefore you can go to these and look at what is the cost, because the co-owners pay sufficient money for their share of the electricity production to keep the result of the nuclear power companies at about 0. And then you see that the cost of continued operation of the Swedish reactors is between 22.5 and 40 euro per kilowatt hour up until 2025, where certainly the cost of the Oskarshamn power was much higher because of a long outage time, and the same will be the case this year. So the price on the Swedish electricity market, if you look at the future prices, is about, as you said, I think you calculated something higher than the 40-50 euros per megawatt hour that we see. So you could expect if you would build a large reactor, the subsidy would be in the order of rather maybe 1 crown per kilowatt hour. If you're going to build small reactors that will in the beginning not be modular, they will produce electricity at an even higher price. And that will mean that at least the numbers you gave will be relevant. And you calculated it divided by the households. If you read the public investigation by Mats Delén, he suggested it should be shared by all electricity consumers, including industry. And that would not be fun for the electricity-intensive industries, and we would not get an increased demand for electricity. And then what would happen is that the consumption would not increase because the consumers would have to pay for the subsidies, but the spot market price would be low. And with a low spot market price, the existing nuclear reactors would be shut because they have the highest avoided cost. The hydropower and the wind power would continue to operate. So new subsidized nuclear power will not necessarily mean, at least not as much nuclear power in total, because the existing reactors would be outcompeted. So we would stop producing electricity in low-cost existing reactors and subsidize new reactors.
Let's see if this is on. Yeah, thank you so much. Do you want to add something to that, Lina? Or
I kind of want to add for the record that I'm not against nuclear, and I think there may be places and times where nuclear is actually a good idea, but not now and not in Sweden.
Thank you so much. Tomas, any closing reflection before we move on to the next round of comments?
Let the audience in.
Okay, yeah, so soon. Don't get ahead of the program. But we will welcome Matilda. Let's give it here to Matilda Molander, CEO of think tank Fores, and Lisa Pelling, Director of Arena Idé. So, okay. I have a question for you. So what findings of this report do you think is necessary for the political discussion? What do you bring with you for the politicians and decision makers in Sweden?
Yeah, well, I think what's most interesting with this report, or in my point of view after having read it, is maybe not what it says about nuclear power, but what it says about nuclear power in relations to other ways of producing electricity. And because in order to fight climate change, we need to phase out fossil fuel, and then we need cheap electricity, as was described here before. And I think, as Lina talked about before, the Swedish discussion on energy politics has become very much a left-right political issue, where if you're on the political right, you want nuclear power and you don't like wind power, and then if you're on the political left, it's the opposite, roughly. But if you want to lower electricity prices in Sweden, there is a very swift way of doing this without having to install any new power. You can just lower the electricity tax in Sweden, which is among Europe's highest. So what I would like the Swedish politicians to do is to, instead of the goal to, or the aiming of having Europe's lowest fuel prices, we should aim for Europe's lowest electricity taxes instead. And that's my first little comment.
Lisa.
Yes. So it's an excellent report, and I totally agree with Matilda. This one aspect is really interesting. To me, the most interesting thing when I read it a couple of years back for the first time, and now again, I get reminded of how it crashes with Swedish self-perception. I think as Swedes, we have this perception of being a very modern country. We are the first with the latest. So we do, like, we are at the forefront of new technologies. And in the perspective, nuclear is so yesterday. It's so 1970s. And are we going to, increase our nuclear capacity with 30%, going from 6 reactors to 2 reactors, when the rest of the world is just canceling the projects, delaying them, pausing them, closing down the reactions. It's shocking to the self-perception. It's also shocking to this debate. Otherwise, I think what is most noticeable, of course, for the Swedish debate is what is not in the debate. I think the problem maybe with the Swedish debate is not that people do not know these numbers, because they are accessible. Mycle has been producing this report now for 15 plus years, but the fact that the debate is not about the data and the facts, but about, as you say, identity politics.
And what do you think is needed to shift that? How can we move from this very politically sensitive this dialogue and more be about numbers, data, and actual delivery? What do you think? Do you want to start?
Well, I think this traduction or some översättning.
Translation.
Translation, sorry. I was mixing up with my French. But I think this translation is a very good first step. But if you're looking at because we need more facts in the debate, but what we really need, and which I hope that more facts could help with, is an energy agreement from left to right that makes energy politics a long-term project again, and not a project for winning the next election.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to let you in soon, Tomas. You're eager to respond to this as well. I'm going to let you in after Lisa.
I am totally +1 on that. We need a stable, long-term decision, not to make this identity politics, not to make this trying to win the marginal voters from each other. It's extremely destructive. It's going to be very costly. It's going to delay the climate transition that we desperately need. The facts on the delays alone are telling us we do not have time to argue about this. We just need to get on with solar and with batteries and with wind, and with, we cannot just spend our time and our money on this issue. But this is a conundrum that we need to solve, right? How can we move the political landscape out of this? And I think the most urgent thing now is to make sure that the Social Democrats who are triangulating this issue now, because they are trying to keep it away from the election debate, do not put themselves into a position that they cannot get out of after the election. That is the main challenge, and I think maybe the center party has a key role here in, reining them in and saying, do not make any stupid promises about this now that you cannot get out of because you know the facts. It would not be a wise idea to tie yourself to this one solution when all the other solutions are better and are available and are cheaper.
Thank you.
And I'm also very happy about the current government's decision to move forward with a scheme for revenue sharing for wind power, because what we're seeing in Sweden now is that wind power is not built partly due to the low energy prices, but also because there is so much local opposition. And one of the most important factors for creating a larger local acceptance for wind power, which Forest, my think tank, has written a report about, is that there needs to be more revenue sharing with the local population. And so I really hope that this regulation will be in place this summer.
Thank you. Tomas.
I just wanted to say that Matilda's report is available here if you want to.
Okay. Tomas, what are your thoughts?
How
do we shift the debate?
Well, my former colleague, Mycle Schneider, who used to be a minister for the moderate party, he called me a market fundamentalist. And that gives me the right to say that I'm right. And I'm still very skeptical to these nuclear programs. And I will add one more very important economic factor, and that is that the price of oil per unit energy is about 50 euro per kilowatt hour. And the price of LNG per unit energy is about 50 euro per kilowatt hour. So the idea of substituting oil and fossil fuels in industry and transport with something that is cheaper, which could be the existing nuclear reactors and new wind power, is a good idea. But replacing it with something that costs 3 or 4 times as much is a bad business proposition.
Thank you. And I think that concludes these reflections for now. And I want to open up the floor to you guys. And okay, you want to comment, Mycle?
Tomas, if you want to comment on the source you have been mentioning before. This is the numbers for France, for the EPR. And it's interesting to see to what extent, this has increased from the construction start. These are all put into 2023 euros. So it's really real comparison, right? The value of the money has been taken into account. So it went up from 4.5 to roughly 24 billion euros, the cost estimate for the EPR reactor. Everybody can make his own calculation of what factor that involved. And it's also one of the big problems we have in economics is always what's actually in those costs, right? I mean, are we talking just, and what is not? Is this just construction, or what is like the first fuel, or what does that mean for operating these reactors after? And obviously one doesn't know how many kilowatt hours they will actually generate, because then you have to divide the investment cost by kilowatt hour. So you get into huge calculations and speculation, which are always kind of tricky.
Thank you. Okay, we have a first question here. I'm gonna hand you I'm gonna make sure that your mic is on. Maybe you turn it on. So turn it on, and then we have 2 mics to circulate the room.
Thank you very much. A very, very interesting evening. And I'm just a layman, but I'm very much in agreement with you 3 who seem to be very much in agreement. So therefore, I ask a provocative question. If Eva Busch was here tonight, how would she try to turn the argument? Because I think she's crazy in pushing this nuclear investment here now in Sweden.
So who feels, you want to, Tomas, maybe that was directed to you.
What they tried to argue initially was that nuclear power contributed values or services to the system that was not dealt with by the electricity market. And one of those issues would be stability. And that has been shown by Per Holmberg and Tomas Tangerås in an analysis on what's not functioning well in the market, that in a way that's justified because the synchronous generators do contribute to some stability in the system. But they also note that based on reports from Fingrid, that is monitoring the frequency stability in the synchronized Nordic grid, the reason why you need stabilization is when something happens to large power lines or large power plants. So the large nuclear reactors are also the cause of the need for this stability. And if you sum it up, they suggest that large nuclear reactors would actually have to pay more than they would be paid if this was really dealt with economically. Small nuclear reactors may deserve to be paid, but that would be in the order of €1 per kilowatt hour, not the 1 crown per kilowatt hour in cost difference. Other arguments that are used is that you need nuclear when the wind is not blowing. But that's something that's dealt with by the market. You don't need that. You can't use it to justify subsidies. And if you look at the other ideas they have about the value of synchronous generators, all that is dealt with very effectively by modern power electronics and energy storages, and it's solved in other parts of the world. So that simply doesn't work. So I think the case for subsidizing nuclear is quite weak. It's very weak, actually. And that may be the reason why Ebba Busch is not here.
Thank you. Anyone else from the panel who want to? Yeah, Lina?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a great question to kind of try and steelman their argument. And I will say that what I think they would say is that nuclear is a lot cheaper. They're very, very optimistic. And also, part of the subsidy is actually the government or the state guaranteeing loans and risk sharing, basically taking the risk. And it's quite hard to quantify the amount of subsidy that entails. So part of it is a price that they're going to pay that for 40 years or whatever. But part of it is other stuff, and it's hard to quantify. And I think that's one way of kind of fiddling with the numbers that might help them.
You want to? No? Okay, so we have next question here in the front.
Thanks a lot for this opportunity. I love the presentations, all of them. Thank you very much, all of you. Now, one aspect of energy supply is dependence on foreign countries, and we see that very clearly with the Hormuz thing now. Now, if we look at nuclear power, that will lead us into another dependence of fuel supply. Now, not even solar panels will relieve us of this dependence. How do we do to be self-sufficient in Europe for solar panels and wind powers? Can the European Union subsidize that sort of industry? Thank you.
Do you want to direct the question to someone specific, or can we?
Tomas.
Yeah. Yeah, this one is yours.
Indeed, what you say is correct, that when you import fuels, you're dependent on continuous supply of these fuels, and if you don't get the fuels, the power plants will stop and the cars will stop operating. The dependency on imported wind power plants or solar panels and batteries is different, because if the import stops, everything that you have in operation will continue to operate. You're just not able to expand the system, and that is a magnificent difference. All that given, I still agree that it would be desirable for industrial and competitiveness reasons that we had a European industry. And I think that we have to understand that we should no longer invite Chinese students, but Chinese professors to come to Sweden. And that is still not understood by all, because now China is ahead technologically. It's not low-cost labor that is their competitiveness anymore. It's that they are very skilled. And I was an advisor there, paid by the Swedish taxpayers 15 years ago, and helped them with a low-carbon industrialization strategy. And we pointed out that rare earth metals and copper and lithium were important to succeed in electrification, and they took our advice, which is now somewhat embarrassing for Europe and the US. But it's not very difficult, and there are resources also in other parts of the world. It's just that you need to contract them, you need to develop the mines, you need to develop these manufacturing industries. And learn from the Chinese. Don't believe that they are stealing our knowledge. We should steal theirs.
Thank you. You can keep the mic, and we have a second question.
Can I add
Yeah,
something
absolutely. Mycle, go ahead.
I think the first thing to do is maybe stop destroying our own industry. You know, I mean, not so long ago, Germany was world leader in solar technology, not only in technology, but in actual implementation, in deployment. In 2012 and 2013, Germany deployed in each year 7.5 gigawatts of solar panels. That was world record then, right? And then came the government and basically scrapped the whole thing and destroyed the solar industry through various measures, in particular to capping. You know, they basically limited, so if you don't have the opportunity to sell, well, then you close shop, you know, at some point. And so a blooming industry has been destroyed in Germany. And it's not, you know, you have a very similar pattern, what happened in France. It just happened earlier, right? And in a more, how shall I say, consistent way over the years. You know, it's been done over and over again to maintain the nuclear, you know, kind of myth, etc. It was very logical why this happened. So I think that's the first thing to do, is stop destroying industry that exists. And in terms of technology, I mean, German solar power is still, in technological terms, top-notch. I mean, they're still developing, you know, satellite, for example, solar systems that are very expensive, but they're where the efficiency is counting. And so that means that the technology is there, right? I mean, they master top-notch technology, but not on the level of where you can have large-scale production for that. The Chinese are top-notch in that. There's no doubt about that. And in all stages, like from development to implementation. And they're the manufacturing geniuses of the world, whatever they manufacture. You know, it's just well done.
Thank you. Any other comment from the panel? No? Okay, so we have a question here.
Okay, quick question to Thomas and Lina. You are representing sort of academia. And when I listen to you, it's sort of, as I say in Swedish, holy huvudet, totally irrational to go for nuclear. Is this a consensus in Swedish academia, or is there somebody in academia making the opposite position?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, good question. Thanks for that question. Actually, I would portray academia as also quite polarized on this question. And yeah, I mean, again, there are not that many system or energy system analysis experts in Sweden, but there's at least one who is very much a proponent of nuclear. But internationally, this has been a big thing also in academia. And I think maybe partly because energy research used to be sponsored a lot by the energy companies. So BP has its own, you know, annual global report. So yeah, does that answer your question? His name is Staffan Kvist, by the way, if anyone wants to read his papers.
No. And he's really a nuclear scientist to start with. So I think we have several nuclear engineering researchers who are enthusiastic about their technology. But I find that when you talk to them about these cost issues and so on, they understand the challenges. So that can be a very decent dialogue, not so polarized, maybe with the exception of Staffan Kvist. But most others are easy to discuss with. And I think that there are also quite a lot of consensus about the importance of having qualified nuclear engineers to maintain the existing nuclear reactors. And I think that is important, and I was doing a lot for that, to that end when I was on the Vattenfall board, but that is a completely different thing from spending enormous amounts of money on building new reactors.
You had a follow-up question. Yeah, thank you.
So if that's the case, I mean, we're now going into an election year, right? I'm really hoping that academia steps up and tries to pull this discussion out of the left-right.
Thank you.
You have one sitting almost right next to you. Yeah, so talk to him.
Okay. Hello, Rolf Lindahl from Greenpeace Sweden. I have a question to Mycle and perhaps others. So I'm interested in this reality versus fantasy or fiction kind of thinking. And it's a good description by you that the solar industry and the renewable industry is growing and investments is going to that direction, not nuclear. But still we see this debate, this hype of nuclear in not to speak about Sweden, but also in some other European countries. We have the Nuclear Alliance, and they have been on climate meetings talking about tripling nuclear, although a fiction, obviously. But But we have that, and they are lobbying to change the renewable energy directive to a fossil-free directive, and they are lobbying to get subsidies. So it's kind of a big hype in that. And we have in Greenpeace seen nuclear as a distraction to the energy transition and thus to the climate transition. But I'm getting a little worried here because we are spending a lot of time in this talking 4 years in Sweden talking about this stupid thing instead of other important things, and we are piling up subsidies, 1,000 billion crowns or something like that, and renewable energy is going down in Sweden and some other countries, not in the world but here. Is it perhaps more of a not only a distraction but a threat? So that's kind of, is this hype? Sorry, I don't really mean if this will be another reactor or two, that's not the issue, but the kind of the distraction that we are continuously locked up into this idea of nuclear and not focusing on what is needed. Is that a threat to the kind of transition, or is it not?
Do you want to get on that, Mycle?
Sure. I think it definitely is a huge problem of focus. And you can say that that focus sort of gets diluted, into areas which are not delivering. What I'm trying to convey is to say, this whole debate, pro and con, I'm not available for. Because the question is not whether nuclear is a good or a bad option. It's no option. And I think people need to understand that if the background of this whole debate is climate change and the idea that we need to come up with something that addresses the climate, what we call now the climate emergency, that means what? It means if you put your money somewhere, you only have one choice, right? You can put it there or you can put it somewhere else. So the choice must be reduce greenhouse gas emissions as much as you can per krona invested, the fastest. So it's the combination of economic or financial effectiveness and time. And that means that every krona you invest into new nuclear is making the climate emergency worse because it's not invested somewhere else where, that you can call options. So I'm not discussing the good or bad, of nuclear power because it's irrelevant. It's no option, And I think if we get that off, this kind of sterile pro-con debate, we make a huge advance. If people understand that nuclear power is just not there. It's not whether you like it or not. I mean, you can regret it or you can be thankful, like Greenpeace would be, but it doesn't matter. It's not here, and it's not available. And the plans of the Swedish government for new nuclear is irrelevant for the next 20 years. But we need to solve the climate crisis over these next exactly those 20 years. So what are we talking about? That's my problem.
Nuclear discussions is not a threat to the global development. We've seen the data. The development of renewables is very fast. It's now so fast that the fossil fuel consumption is actually, or at least for electricity generation so far, is decreasing. So that is not a problem. But it is an enormous problem in individual countries, and that has nothing to do with climate because it's a matter of competitiveness. The countries who develop low-cost renewables will have cheaper electricity and better economic competitiveness. And that's why the discussion and delay in Sweden now is so serious, because other countries are catching up with us in fossil-free, low-cost electricity. For many years, Sweden has had the lowest cost in Europe. Now Spain and Portugal, so far this year, has had lower electricity prices than Sweden. And that is something that industry is aware of. And when they invest, these investments will not move.
Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I loved Mycle's presentation. I think it was was great, and I think that
Thank you.
the emperor's new clothes are very real and solid compared to the arguments of the nuclear industry. And what I came here rather certain, but I think you have shown that it's very much worse than even I and a lot of people like me believed. But the mystery is that it's still possible to discuss in this way, and I wonder what the where the media is. I mean, how can I think just having your speech translated into Swedish and shortened and pedagogically would convince people that as you say, it's not an option. It's just a waste of time. And my question to the panelists is, how can you get Swedish media to do its job and getting rid of this absolutely insane discussions of what you call it, identity discussions, etc. It's just, I think the media, if well, if equipped with some people with spine, would be able to do this. Well, thank you.
Lisa?
No, I just think that what we're doing right now is trying to reach out to the media. Of course, so Mycle has been given a series of interviews. We have taken a great care to produce this in Swedish so that it's easily accessible. It's printed, it's online. We'll put this one online as well. But we count on all of you to be ambassadors. You know, go tell people, keep this, use the report in your networks. This is the only thing we can do.
There's some journalists.
Well, the problem is that the politics, they won the election by said we're going to build nuclear power and we're going to lower the price on petrol. We'd have to accept that. We have to argue. We're waiting for the El Niño to show us what is coming, and then we might be able to argue to higher the prices on petrol and diesel to explain why we have to do that. But today, it's impossible. But there are some things that are happening out in the country. There are companies now going to me as a householder and say, okay, we buy your battery, we buy your electric pump, and you pay a low cost every month, and we fix it everything because they want to use my solar panels. And my wife said, yes, let them do that. You might die every day, and I will be alone. So let them do that.
And you're right. The economics is just going to solve it. But what government policy has done in Sweden, which is, I think, unique, is that we have managed to get electricity taxes to be higher per unit energy. Domestically produced fossil-free electricity has a higher tax than imported fossil fuels. And that is hidden because in the tax tables you see electricity tax in SEK per megawatt hour and fuel taxes in SEK per cubic meter. So you have to calculate one into the other. And you don't have to be a professor to do it, but it seemed to help because we dare to calculate. But those comparisons are quite important also in the public debate. So we need to bring them out.
Any more comments from the panel? No? Okay, let's...
Okay. This is a very strange debate. We have an earth with about 8 billion people. Most of them have a huge lack of energy, and all our society and our high living standard is based on cheap energy that is continually delivered, especially when you talk about the electricity. And if we want to have an industrial society, which Sweden is not anymore, as everybody knows, then we let to China to have the world industrial production then, and then we can maybe buy, but I don't know what China will ask for us, because if we can't produce anymore, and this is also with infrastructure building. I mean, 50 years ago, Sweden built 12 nuclear power plants, 1,200,000 apartments in 20 years. But now we can't do that anymore. Explain to me, please, why we can't do that anymore. We cannot build in Sweden and invest in anymore. And that is a big problem. How to lose it? It's also in energy.
Thank you. That's a good point, because some argue that the reason nuclear power is now expensive is that we have introduced a lot of ridiculous regulations. But if you look at the cost of electricity from the last 2 nuclear reactors in Sweden, built in 1986, their cost was about 40 to 50 euro per kilowatt hour in the price of that day. And if you increase that with inflation, you get to about 1 crown 40, which is what new nuclear costs in Europe today. So it's not that construction has become much more expensive. The reactors may have become slightly better, but they cost just about as much to build as then. So we have not, it's not that it has deteriorated, but it has not improved either. The great difference is that solar and wind is so much cheaper. So that's important. And then I think we should be able to produce more in Europe. China is no longer ahead of us because of low labor costs. That's because they have more advanced engineering and science, and we can catch up on that if we understand that that is what we must do, and stop believing that the Chinese are stealing our knowledge, because that is not the problem. We must steal their knowledge.
Thank you.
We have to admit that first, to do that step.
We have time for one last question,
Thank you very much.
then we are rounding up.
Okay, thank you very much for the interesting presentation and discussion. I have actually a very following question about the industry. So you mentioned always negative learning for nuclear. I'm curious, does China has ever achieved a positive learning for nuclear? I understand that China has, the whole domestic supply chain nowadays for nuclear. Is that helpful? And also following his question, is Europe or Sweden ready in terms of supply chain if Europe or Sweden wants to have more nuclear power?
Yeah, I mean, on China first, this is the entire Chinese fleet, reactor by reactor, and it's put on a scale of construction time. So this is very strange, actually, for us. When we did this, we were very surprised to get this picture, because what does it show? You have these 2 waves, right? I do it better on the computer before falling over the cables. So you have you have this first wave, right, which is generation 2. I mean, just to simplify things, right? So it's like a first wave of construction, but you don't see a declining construction time. On the contrary, you see a slightly increasing construction time on that period. And then you get to the next period, which is generation 3, which is jumping around, but there's also rather an increasing trend than a decreasing trend. And the overall figure of 6.1 years is not that brilliant neither. Because if you look in China, the estimated construction time at construction start is roughly 5 years. It's like in other countries. It's just that in other countries, the builders are even worse. But it's not all, good news neither for the industry in China. And we don't really understand. Like, I had tried to get one of our researchers that do the China chapter to investigate that. We weren't able to really understand. So for the time being, we can just report. This is what comes out of it. If you're interested in that, we have an interactive version online where you can check every reactor, individually. And one of the most interesting things here is that the outliers, these two ones, the other ones are foreign projects. That's a different story. But these outliers are the only SMRs they built. They were supposed to be particularly fast and easy to build, etc. So that's on China. When it comes to supply chain, no, there's no supply chain. I mean, there's no capacity of building nuclear power plants in Europe, full stop. It's as easy as that. I mean, you even globally, you have basically a handful of potential builders. You have the Chinese and CNNC and CGN. They have a big problem. They have been blacklisted by the US government. And you don't build easily anywhere when you're blacklisted by the US government. Certainly not in Sweden. Russia, I think we don't have to talk much about it. They have a sort of a geopolitical problem these days. Then you have the South Koreans. Very interesting, because the South Koreans, everybody says, well, the Chinese and the South Koreans can build, right? But I looked it up recently. The South Koreans connected 3 reactors to the grid over the past 10 years. Not more, 3. Average construction time, 10 years. It's not really brilliant neither, right? I mean, it's not what they did in the beginning, like 5 years or so average. So then you have, and they built only once abroad. That was in the UAE, in Baraka, 4 reactors. We don't know what they cost. They signed a confidentiality agreement. There's no information publicly available. 0 information, and I'm serious. 0 information publicly available. But the parent company of the Korean building company, Capco, has a debt load, and now you're sitting, that's good, because it's around $150 billion debt load. I didn't even know that any company in this world can survive a debt load of that size, So that isn't really a sign that they made a lot of money in selling nuclear power plants. And so who is left? Well, EDF. We have seen the EDF example. That was the last building they did. There's nothing under construction. They are building now in the UK, but that is on schedule to have exceeding even the Flamanville cost, because they're already at the same level. So, and the only other example of builders that is always given is Westinghouse, but Westinghouse is a designer, is not a builder. That's not the same thing. People have to, like, the vendor as a technology vendor, they basically sell their design, but then somebody else has to take the risk. And they went on the record to say, we don't take the risk anymore. Like, they went bankrupt over the last construction thing, So they said, we learned the lesson, we won't do that anymore. That's not really a capacity that can build anything in Europe. So it's necessarily who? I don't know. GE Hitachi? Well, they never built anywhere. And so all the others are hypothetical, but they're not the ones that have built over the past 20 years.
Thank you so much. And we are we have passed it with 3 minutes. So if you need to leave, you can do that, but you are also welcome to stay on. And before we wrap up here, I also going to say that Tomas had to leave because he's preparing for Energimässan tomorrow and Thursday. Maybe some of you are going there. But for the rest of you, I have one concluding question. If you have like one message you want to give Swedish decision makers based on the report and your presentation today, what would that be? Do you want to start off, Mycle?
Well, I mean, I think we need to get off speculation and need to look at the facts. So we have to, and it sounds funny, but we have to admit that they're actually facts. You know, this is not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of opinion, and that is one of the really big problems we have today, because this nuclear discussion is being dealt with as there were only opinions. Oh, this is what Schneider says. Oh, this is what so-and-so says. But excuse me, I mean, there are differences, and I think we have to just, you know, sit down and say, these are facts we can agree on. This is why I call this work, like the report, I call it a carpet for debate. We need to stand on something, you know, that is coherent and that people can agree on. If somebody says there's a mistake in the report, in 24 hours we put up a new version. You know, we repair things, we make mistakes, nobody is perfect. But I think we need to agree on something. You know, this is not a religion. We're not in a belief system. We need to, you know, look at some numbers and facts and say, okay, we can agree on that, and then we can discuss what they mean. You know, but that's the first step. And I can only invite politicians and decision makers, whether it's in Sweden or elsewhere, to just do that job first, you know, before getting into some kind of pie in the sky fantasy discussion.
So do the homework, basically.
That's your words, yes.
Lina, do you wanna what do you wanna, like, what message do you wanna bring to Swedish decision makers?
Yeah, thank you. So basically, show the numbers and tell us who are going to pay for it, because that's also not clear. Is it the taxpayers? Is it the electricity consumers, or is it just the household electricity consumers? Thanks.
Thank you, Matilda.
Well, I think I will repeat myself that the most important thing is to reach an energy agreement from left to right in Sweden, so that we get out of this stalemate situation and that we can build any sort of energy. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa?
We don't have time for nuclear. It's not an option. I'm +1 on all of these comments, and I'm looking forward to continue the discussion here as well.
Thank you all, Lina, Matilda, Mycle, of course, and Lisa. And thanks to you for your participation.
Thank you all.
And you're more than welcome to stay on. We have some drinks and snacks here, and keep the discussions going. And keep the discussion fact-based, please.